to you very briefly now about children and death, whether it's the death of the child himself or the death of somebody the child cares about. The one most important thing that we must remember about children is that children take what grown-ups say very literally. Children do not understand sarcasm. Children don't understand double meaning. Children take what we say word for word. So we must be very careful what we say to children. I find that in talking to children about death, the younger the children are, and I'm talking about from 3 years old on up, the younger the children are, the more trusting they are, and they have no fear of death because they haven't lived long enough to learn fears from grown-ups. I teach a class for 6 to 12-year-olds on death and dying in Montgomery, and some of those children amaze me. I will go into the room and say, how many in this room know where babies come from? And these days every hand goes up. I know. And I'll say, all right, where does it come from? And usually they'll say, from inside the mommy. And again, children today are very knowledgeable, and I'll say, what's it like in there? And hands shoot up and voices come out. Oh, he swims around all day. Yeah, just swims around all day. And I'll say, is it cold in there? No, it's not cold. It's pretty hot because there are no windows. That's what one child told me. And I get these children to tell me what it's like inside the mother, and some of them are marvelous. I could listen all day. But the usual consensus is that he swims around in there all day and it's pretty hot, and he's never cold and he's never hungry because he eats what the mother eats. And one little boy told me that baby eats everything my mama eats except the radishes, and they make her burp. But I get the children to talking about these babies inside the mother, and then I say, and I'm going to say the same thing to you, just imagine that there's a baby inside this mother who is the most super baby there ever was. He's going to be the most intelligent baby there ever was in the world. This is a super kid. And this baby, in his warm, dark, wet world, he's never hungry, he's never scared, he's always comfortable. He likes it where he is. It's a pretty nice world. But this baby knows some way that one day this world is going to change. He doesn't know what it's going to change into. He's heard rumors about it, and he's got an idea of what he hopes it's going to be like. But he knows this world's going to change, and he's not too sure. He wants it to change. He likes it where he is. And just suppose this baby with the super brain could find a way never to be born. It'd be kind of hard on his mama, but just imagine he found a way. He's going to say, I'm not going. I'm going to stay here forever. And then I ask these children, if he could have his wish and make himself stay where he is forever, tell me some of the things that he would miss by not being born. What are some of the things he'd miss? Hands shoot up all over the room when there are 6-year-olds. What's the matter with you lot? But one of the things he would miss would be smiles. He'd never see a smile. How about icicles? How about popsicles? He'd never know what it meant to be held at a breast. He'd never know what it meant to be held by his daddy or his grandmother. He'd never know tricycles, Christmas trees. There are so many things he would miss if he could elect not to be born. But I'll tell you that even the most super baby in the world, the most imaginative baby in the world, who had always lived in a dark, warm, wet world, there's no way that he could ever imagine fire. So even if I could change the rules and not go, I don't think I'd change the rules, because I can't imagine what's out there. And by George, I want to know. You know, if I had my way, every parent and grandparent of any child of 3 years and older would be given a copy of a book called Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's Web is all about dying. And if you read Charlotte's Web to young children and let them ask you questions, children will accept the fact that, like Charlotte, life does come to an end, and it's not necessarily a frightening or a fearsome thing. So those of you with young children in your families, get a copy of Charlotte's Web and read it to them. It's a good book. There are other books in the library about children and death. Another good book is called 10 Good Things About Barney. And it's by a man named Lester. I don't remember his first name. But 10 Good Things About Barney is a good book to read to young children, because it's about a boy named Barney who died. And the story is about 10 good things. Let's think of 10 good things about Barney. And at the end of the book, the child is glad that she knew about Barney, even though he's dead. So don't overlook the library as a source for materials to talk to children about death. But above all, be truthful with children. I think we should treat children and death the way we're told to treat children and sex. We should answer their questions as they come up, as briefly and as factually as possible. We never talk to children in terms of death and sleep. If we tell a child, Grandma is asleep, when grandmother's in her casket or on the bed and grandmother is dead, and we say Grandma is asleep, that child knows that Grandma never came back. She never got to talk to Grandma anymore. And we can create such fears in the minds of young children. And the sad part about it is, the children don't know enough to come and talk to us and say, I'm really upset about Grandma being asleep and I've never seen her again. They don't know that they can do that with us. They don't know how to find the words. So we don't talk about death and sleep. This was brought home to me several months ago when I was caring for a young boy, a 7-year-old, who was dying. And he did everything in the world that he could to keep himself awake. When he was strong enough to sit up, he would bang his head against the back of the bed to keep awake. And when he could no longer sit up, he tried to bang his wrists on the side frame of the bed to keep awake. And I went in there one day and I said, listen, if you'll just take a nap, I promise I'll hold you the whole time. I won't put you down. I will just hold you the whole time you're sleeping if you'll just take a nap. And he said, no. I said, why won't you go to sleep? He said, I can't go to sleep. I'm sick. And I said, but that's why you need to have a nap. You need to have some sleep because you're sick. And this 6-year-old said to me, my grandpa was sick and he went to sleep and they put him in a box and threw dirt on him. Now this is a terrible picture for a 6-year-old to have in his mind, that if you're sick, you better not go to sleep. Somebody will put you in a box and throw dirt on you. I would hate to be responsible for scaring a child like that. Children understand the words dead, dying, death. We don't need to use pretty word pictures with children. Grandmother is dead. Her life is over. Is just as beautiful as Grandma's gone on a long trip. Grandma has left us. Grandmother is dead. Nothing wrong with that. And yet it makes it real and final to the child, because death is real and final on this earth. So we don't talk in terms of death and sleep. We don't talk about death and journeys either. To say Grandpa's gone on a trip to heaven only means that to a child, and maybe he didn't want Grandpa to go on a trip to heaven. He also knows that Grandpa never came back. And a young child cannot distinguish between a trip to heaven and a trip to the grocery store. What happens to this same child if his mama goes to the hospital to have another baby? He knows he's never going to see her again. What happens when she drops him off at nursery school for the first time and she disappears? Will it be like Grandpa? Will he never see her again? And yet when he screams and has a tantrum, nobody even thinks that maybe he's having a tantrum because he's scared to death. He's afraid he'll never see her again. To say that Grandpa is dead, his life is over, is the kindest and it is the truthful way to talk to children. Again, I'm reminded of a little girl who is being treated today because of something that somebody loved her told her. This little girl had a father who was dying of a brain tumor. And this little girl's mother was a nurse who always worked the 3 to 11 shift. And that meant that her daddy was the one who always gave her supper and bathed her and played with her and put her to bed. And he and his daughter were very close. And when we found that he was going to die from this brain tumor, her mother said, "Will you tell Barbara everything that's happening? I don't want her to be scared, and I want her to be able to remember her father with love, and I want her to know that we did not shut her out when he was dying. So will you tell her?" And I said yes. And I explained to that child what was happening to her daddy. And I taught that child several tasks that she could do for her daddy. Now, she was only 5 years old, but she could climb on the bed with a damp washcloth. And by the way, I found her one day bathing his face with a washcloth that was absolutely dripping. And with her little hands, she couldn't squeeze out too much water, so we worked out a way. She would squeeze as much water out of the washcloth as she could, then she put it down on the bath mat and jumped up and down on it. And really, that got enough water out, and she could do it with her father. And she would keep his face and his hands bathed, and she powdered him a lot and used lotion on him, and she talked to him, and she always called him my sweet daddy. No, my sweet little daddy. You're my sweet little daddy. And I taught her several things that she could do for him. Not make-believe things, but real things. She could make sure she stood by with the napkin if food dripped, because he had to be fed in the end days. And she was so gentle with the spoon. And she had to use both hands to hold her wrist steady while she put the spoon in his mouth. But she was so good about mopping up drips. And he loved it, and he loved her. Well, when he finally died, she was on the bed with him, and I had told her that it was going to end any minute now. And I had let her use my stethoscope to listen to his heartbeat, and she could hear it. And she was very glad when she could hear my sweet little daddy's hearts beating. And finally, when the heart stopped, and I put the stethoscope in her ears again, and I said, "Say goodbye now." And I put the stethoscope to his chest, and she said, "My sweet daddy's not in there." And I said, "No, he isn't. Your daddy has died." Well, this little girl reacted in a very normal way. She cried, and she didn't want it to be this way, and she went through all the normal things that you would expect a 5-year-old to go through, and she handled it very well. But about a month after his funeral, she was sitting on her front porch when a very loving, caring, gentle preacher came by, and she was crying. And he said, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "I want my daddy." And he said, "Wasn't your daddy a carpenter?" And she said, "Yes, he made houses for people to live in." And this caring preacher said, "Well, don't cry. Right this minute, your daddy is up in heaven with Jesus, who was also a carpenter, and they're making a house for you. So don't feel sad." And 5 minutes later, that child was found crisscrossing a highway in front of her house with her eyes closed. When you're 5, you don't know many ways to commit suicide. But she knew that if her daddy was building a house for her, she had to get to him. And the only way was to die. That child is still in therapy today, and she will be for many years to come, because she's convinced we are all keeping her from her daddy. This is just an example of what you can do in love if you don't know what you're doing. So it's best to be truthful as possible with children and death. Before I get off this subject, and it's a tremendous subject, I'm sorry that I don't have a whole afternoon to devote just to children and death. But before I leave it, I'd like to tell you about a gift I got a couple of years ago that's meant a lot to me. Bobby was 9 years old and dying of cancer of the liver, and Bobby knew that he was dying. He'd been raised by his mama alone someplace in Ohio. The child's father had left when he was an infant. And when they told this mother the awful news that her son was going to die, she panicked and went from doctor to doctor and hospital to hospital, hoping that somebody would tell her it was all a mistake. And nobody did. And when she was down to her last few dollars, she and the boy got on a Greyhound bus and came down to Montgomery and moved in with an old aunt who did not want either one of them. And when I came on the scene, Bobby's pain was out of control, and she could not find a pediatrician who would take him. They all told her their caseloads were full and they were taking no more new cases. Well, I was able to find Bobby a physician, and we got him on Brompton's mixture and brought the pain under control. And Bobby and I became very good friends, and he did know that he was dying. And when I asked him how he knew he was dying, he said he'd heard some of the nurses in one of the hospitals whispering about it. And I said, "Oh, come on, Bobby, if they were whispering, how do you know it was about you?" And Bobby said, "When grown-ups whisper, it's always about you. It's either something bad you've done or something bad that's going to happen to you." So that's one lesson I learned, that you don't whisper in front of children, because they always assume that you're whispering about them. Another time, Bobby said to me, "Miss Eve, when I die, will it hurt?" And I said, "No, it won't hurt." He said, "How do you know it won't hurt?" And I said, "Well, you're not hurting now, are you?" And he said, "No, not with your good medicine." I said, "Then trust me. When you die, it will not hurt, I promise." And he accepted that. Another time he said to me, "Miss Eve, when I die, will it be all dark?" And I said, "No, I think it's going to be the brightest light you ever saw." And he said, "But how do you know?" And I said, "I just know in here. It's just something I really know." He said, "But how can you truly know?" And the only thing I could think of to say to him was, "Well, how do you know the sun won't fall out of the sky in the morning?" And without hesitation, he said, "Oh, God has charge of that." I said, "That's right, and God has charge of the light. So don't worry about it being dark." And he accepted that. Well, every day when I would go in, Bobby would always greet me with the same question. He'd say, "Miss Eve, am I dying today?" And I would say, "Well, you're not dying right this minute. So what do you want to do? Let's play checkers or read." He loved war stories, and I've got a million of them. I would tell him war stories. But being a good nurse, I was immediately alerted one morning when he did not greet me with the usual question. Instead, he said, "Miss Eve, will you stay with me forever?" And I said, "No, there's no way that I can stay forever, but I can stay for 2 hours. So what do you want to do?" And he said, "No, you've got to stay with me forever, because my forever isn't very long." And I took another look at him, and indeed his forever was not very long. He died later that evening. And I had him on my lap, and I rocked him, and I said, "Bobby, why are you saying this to me?" He said, "Because today's the day, Miss Eve. I'm dying today." And I rocked some more, and he accused me of getting his ear wet. And I said, "Bobby, would you tell me how it feels?" And he said, "Why do you want to know that?" I said, "Because one day I'm going to be in the spot that you're in now, and I want to know, how does it feel?" Well, dear, caring, loving Bobby thought for a minute, and he said, "Well, did anybody ever say to you, 'Come on and go to this place with me'? And you say, 'No, thank you, I don't want to go.' And they say, 'Oh, come on and go. You'll like it when you get there.' He said, 'That's how it feels, Miss Eve, so don't be as scared.' And I'm not as scared, because I know that when my time comes to go, I'm not going to want to go, but I'll like it when I get there. And I found that that's been a great comfort to me, a lesson learned from a child. And we can all learn lessons from children about death. They teach us how to handle death if we give them the chance, if we don't pass on our own fears and insecurities to them. We'll get together again after a while. Thank you.